Hello, welcome to the latest video lesson, Social Responsibility in an Inspector Course. Before I continue with that, a reminder that you can head on over to mrhonline.co.uk to view many more videos on a wide range of topics, as I'm sure you're already aware. Okay, so without further ado, let's crack on with social responsibility in an inspector course. Okay, so first up, the definition of social responsibility. So social responsibility is an ethical framework and suggests that an entity, be it an organisation or individual, has an obligation to act for the benefit of society at large, not just for themselves. Social responsibility is a duty every individual has to perform so as to maintain a balance between the economy and the ecosystems. Okay, so making that relevant to the play. Priestley uses the play to explore the individual's attitude to both personal responsibility and responsibility to the wider society. Within this, he examines how class, age and gender affect this attitude and how prejudice can prevent people from behaving in a responsible or caring manner. In particular, there may be Mrs. Birling and her attitude towards Eva Smith when she came to help her. So think of how each character deals with their sense of responsibility for the plight of Eva, plus what role does the inspector have in kind of holding a mirror up or shining a spotlight on their behaviour. What was happening in society at this time to make this such an important issue? And we'll focus on that on a future screen. Okay, so the areas I'll be looking at when considering the theme of social responsibility are characters' attitudes towards Eva Smith. So which characters accept responsibility and which don't. Characters' attitudes towards each other and the lower classes. So what views are expressed towards the lower classes? Context. How does 1945 society influence views expressed throughout the play towards wider responsibility? And we'll have a little comparison with what society was like in 1912, when of course the characters were existing. What are Priestley's views? He's a socialist. Remember, we need to explore how that comes through the various characters and their attitudes towards social responsibility. What are the consequences of the prevailing attitudes expressed in the play? And how does it actually play out? And how is it left? That arrow is a little bit off, but the incidents in the play. So the way in which each character treated Eva Smith and what it says about their attitudes and responsibility and whether or not they feel any remorse. That's the key part there. Who feels responsible, who accepts responsibility and feels bad for how they've treated Eva, who does not. And finally, how do the audience respond to the individual characters? Which characters are we supposed to like and which characters are we supposed to dislike from how they're portrayed, and explore why. Okay, so a bit of context lying behind Priestley's intentions. So the play, remember, was written in 1945, but it was set in 1912. So what was society like? How did society differ between those 2 years? So in 1912, the First World War would start in 2 years' time. So Birling's optimistic view that there would not be a war is obviously completely wrong. Now we know that because it's happened. In 1945 was a lot later, and so that allows Priestley to use dramatic irony to highlight the flaws in the characters of Birling in particular. In 1945, the Second World War had just ended, so people were recovering from nearly 6 years of warfare, danger, and uncertainty. Back in 1912, there were strong distinctions between the upper and lower classes, but by 1945, class distinctions had been greatly reduced as a result of the two world wars. Back in 1912, women were subservient to men. All well-off women could do was get married. A poor woman was merely seen as cheap labour. But as a result of the wars, women had earned a more valued place in society. Back in 1912, the ruling classes, for obvious reasons, saw no need to change the status quo, keep things as they were, and why wouldn't they want that? However, after the two world wars, there was a great desire for social change. Clement Attlee's Labour Party won a landslide victory over Winston Churchill and the Conservatives. At a time, you would have imagined that the Conservatives' popularity would have been high, having won the war. Priestley, remember, an active socialist and leading voice calling for social reform, was a member of the Common Welfare Party, which merged with the Labour Party in 1945. It is the ideals of socialism that are presented in a positive light in the play, as far more liberal and progressive, benefiting the wider community in a way that the capitalist attitudes simply do not. Priestley was influential in developing the idea of the welfare state, which began to be put into place at the end of the Second World War. Priestley deliberately set the play in 1912 because the date represented an era when all was very different from the time he was writing. In 1912, rigid class and gender boundaries seemed to ensure that nothing would change. You couldn't move, you were stuck where you were. Yet by 1945, and after having endured 2 world wars, most of those class and gender divisions had been breached. Priestley wanted to make the most of these changes. Through his play, he encourages people to seize the opportunity the end of the war had given them to build a better, more caring society. So there's quite a lot of information there, so do pause it and take notes. So again, you go to your stage directions, whether it's character or theme, and you look for clues in the stage directions in relation to whichever character or theme you're looking for. So in this case, we're looking at class. No, we're not. We're looking at social responsibility. So from the stage directions, we learn that the action will take place in the dining room of a fairly large suburban house belonging to a prosperous manufacturer. Also in the stage directions, Edna, the parlour maid, is just clearing the table, which has no cloth, of dessert plates and champagne glasses, etc., and then replacing them with the decanter of port, cigar boxes and cigarettes. Port glasses are already on the table. All 5 are in evening dress of the period, the men in tails and white ties, not dinner jackets. So what can we infer from that? Well, this large suburban house, wealth. Prosperous manufacturer, give him his dues, he was a successful capitalist owner of business. He generated a lot of wealth for himself through a lot of hard work, presumably. Examples of their wealth and upper class ambitions. They're very much behaving in a fashion that an upper class family would. From what we've learned about the context and Priestley's intentions, it's clear from these stage directions that this family are going to be less likely to believe they have much social responsibility, and we can be confident that throughout the play, Priestley will challenge this through the character of the inspector, and then his influence over Sheila. So the inspector, key, crucial, fundamental to most of the action in the play. It is his wish that each member of the Birling family and Gerald accept their role in the death of Eva Smith and start to change their ways, so they pay more consideration to their positions within wider society, that they learn that their actions have consequences which must be considered. His blunt assessment of their roles. Each of you helped to kill her. He's not pulling any punches there. His lasting influence on the young, offering perhaps some hope for the future. We often do on the young ones. They're more impressionable. Public men, Mr. Birling, have responsibilities as well as privileges, further challenging Birling's poor attitude to responsibility for others. His final reminder to the characters, but also to the audience, millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths. A lot of repetition there. Eva Smith and John Smith, the most common surname at the time was Smith. Eva sounds like Eve, first woman born, Adam and Eve, Garden of Eden. So Eva Smith could represent all of working class women, and John Smith all of working class men, whose hard work the wealth of the upper classes is dependent upon. With their lives, their hopes and fears, their chance of happiness, all intertwined with our lives. So this is a reflection on Priestley's own strong socialist beliefs, reinforced by we are responsible for each other. And the warning, if we don't change our ways, will be taught it in fire and blood and anguish. Quite damnation, apocalyptic, hellish imagery there. But remember, in 1912, it could have been a warning that of the 2 wars ahead, and in 1945, it could be a warning that maybe if we don't change our ways, there's another war on its way. Okay, on the other side of the fence, we have Mr. Birling. Mr. Birling accepts no responsibility for his actions and can't understand why anyone would think any different. He believes that every man is responsible for himself and his family. The inspector arrives midway through one of his speeches to that effect, to challenge this view. Priestley uses Arthur Birling to symbolise the dysfunctional capitalist ideologies of the Edwardian era. He wants the audience to dislike Birling, therefore opening themselves up to the possibility of social change themselves and a fairer society for all. I speak as a hard-headed, practical man of business. He repeats this a couple of times, and this links to his capitalist views and his pride. Community and all that nonsense. His attitude towards responsibility and socialism, community and all that nonsense. A man has to mind his own business and look after himself and his own. And at this point the inspector arrives, interrupts him mid-sentence as he's ranting about his own capitalist views and how dismissive he is about caring for others. And his justification, it's my duty to keep labour costs down. So that's the capitalist attitude to his workers. He sees them less as people, more as a means to making profits. This ignores the fact that he's relying on his workforce, the working classes, for his wealth in the first place. And he's confident because there are far too few jobs, many people looking for them. So he knows that if anyone complains about the low wages, he can get rid of them, which is exactly what he does to Eva Smith. And there'll be 10 girls to replace her. So some other quotations linking to this theme. We are not all mixed up like bees in a hive. Mr. Birling says that. Okay, this reinforcing his ideas about community and responsibility. I've clumped these three together from Sheila. So I'm really responsible. I'll never do it again to anybody. If I could help her now, I would. So this contrasts with her father's attitude and response to his treatment of Eva Smith. She's willing to accept responsibility for how her actions have impacted on others, willing also to change. By contrast again, we have Mrs. Birling. She's only herself to blame. I did nothing I'm ashamed of. I accept no blame. Inspector then challenges her. You admit about being prejudiced against her case? Yes. So this is sharing her husband's attitude to responsibility and her attitude to his attitude towards the lower classes. And it stands in contrast to how their daughter feels. And then Eric, he was our inspector, all right. We all helped to kill her. Now, he behaved deplorably with Eva Smith, but in his defence, or to his testament, he actually felt bad and took responsibility and wanted to change and challenged his parents and aligned himself more with Sheila and the inspector. Okay, and the final screen, as usual, is how do you connect this theme to a particular exam question? How could you incorporate it? So any question on the Birlings, we've just explored all of that. The inspector, class and attitudes towards the lower classes, and also towards women as well. The generation gap, differing attitudes there towards responsibility, how the younger Birlings accepted responsibility for their poor behaviour towards Eva Smith, but the older Birlings did not. And ultimately, what lies behind it all are Priestley's intentions. What message was he trying to get across? What did he want the audience to take away from having watched the play? Okay, that covers everything you'll need for social responsibility and how to incorporate it into an exam question. A reminder, do check on Mr. H Online, and you'll find a load more videos, including a guidance on how to answer an exam question on Inspector Calls as well, on a range of different exam boards. Okay, thanks for watching. See you again soon. Bye-bye.